Welcome to The Blast Zone, the podcast where we dig up the bombs that shook Hollywood and try to find out why they went up in flames. This week, if you film it, less than half the people that saw the first one will come. This is Wayne's World 2. Welcome to The Blast Zone.
Welcome to The Blast Zone.
We are not a podcast about bad movies. We are a podcast about movies that did badly.
That's right.
I am Jon Drake, in-house film critic of my Letterboxd account.
And I'm Ian Dukes. I'm a person with thoughts and feelings, and some of them are about movies.
Movies like Wayne's World 2, which we're talking about today. Very exciting. But before we get into that, Ian, how are you doing this week?
Well, I have a theory about roller coasters. Earlier in my life, when I would maybe go to a theme park, and roller coasters were too much for me sometimes. But I realized if you pretend you're in control, that you're steering it, they're much less scary and they're actually physically less affecting. The trick works on your body. It's the difference between running around real fast and being dragged around real fast. So that's my advice. If anybody's like, I'm being forced to go on a roller coaster with my niece and nephew, just fucking steer the thing, man. You're the pilot. Tell yourself that you're taking this next turn and this next dive, and it feels much less queasy inducing. But all that being said, what I haven't figured out how to do is apply this when life itself is an emotional roller coaster. I don't know how to convince myself that I'm the one driving, but maybe that's something I can learn.
That is a predicament. I'm not sure I can help you with that one. I will say, though, that I've never had that response to being on a roller coaster. I'm a big roller coaster lover. The faster and the taller, the better.
Okay.
Maybe that's a metaphor for how we live our lives.
It could be. Something real deep. There might be something there.
There just might be. Well, I don't know if you could tell, but I've got my summertime setup on. I've traded out the studio cans for the earbuds. And I got to be honest, I don't like how they sound.
Oh.
They don't sound as good.
They never do.
It's throwing me off. But they're much less warm.
I mean, you got to accept that trade-off sometimes.
And these are not like cheap earbuds. These are Sennheisers. Like I spent a pretty penny on them. They just can't replicate the sound you get from a good pair of like studio monitors.
Someday technology will catch up.
Someday, but my ears are not beet red and I'm not sweating on my head. So it's worth it, because in the Northeast, as we're recording this, tomorrow is going to be 97 degrees. It's already starting to heat up over here.
That is a hot spring, man.
It is, because, the planet's mad at us. Everything's in disarray. Seasons mean nothing. And this is just the nightmare hellscape we live in now forever.
Kind of
So
sucks.
we're shuffled off this mortal coil. But anyway, did you happen to watch anything this week that you wanted to talk about now that we've bummed everybody out?
Amidst all the carnage, I watched a movie. I'm trying to stay on the horse here and not bring too many TV shows, which I've been accused of doing in the past. I watched a movie called The Gentleman. It is on Netflix now. Came out in 2019, maybe in theaters. I don't know what happened with it.
It was in theaters.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it sure was.
This is a Guy Ritchie flick. It's full-on Guy Ritchie. He's not doing anything new that you haven't seen him try before, but if you like his shtick, it's pretty good. It's got a bunch of good stars. As usually, he's assembled a really fun ensemble cast. Matthew McConaughey, Charlie Hunnam, Michelle Dockery, who you might know from Downton Abbey. She's really fun in this. Jeremy Strong from Succession, Colin Farrell, Hugh Grant. A lot of fun people doing fun
you're
stuff.
burying the lead. This was a big comeback for Hugh Grant. You put him last, but he got a lot of press when this movie came out because, first of all, you don't think crime movie when you think Hugh Grant. And he just hadn't really been in anything for a while, so it was kind of cool to see him in this.
Yeah. Well, his agent insisted that he get that last and featuring Hugh Grant, so I had to wait with him. But there's some things that are a little off-putting about the movie. It plays fast and loose with some racial and gay stereotypes that could make you uncomfortable. It made me uncomfortable in moments, and maybe that's something that Guy Ritchie is liable to stumble into. But if you can put that aside, it's a solid UK crime drama with lots of heavy-handed, broad brushstroke characters and violent coercion and plot twists, and it's kind of fun.
Yeah, I think if you like Guy Ritchie movies, you'll like The Gentleman. It's nothing new from him. I happen to enjoy the majority of his output. I'm not a big fan of the Sherlock Holmes movies he did. And of course, we will have to talk about his King Arthur movie one day. Truly one of the great flops of the 2010s.
Looking forward to that.
Starring Charlie Hunnam, no less.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, like his Rock and Rolla, Snatch, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, those type of crime movies that he does, I think he's very good at. Yeah, I dug this one. It felt like a throwback, not just because it's something of a period piece, but also because it just feels like, a late 90s, early 2000s crime movie that didn't have a lot of subtext, no greater thoughts about the world it was trying to convey. It's just
right.
Here's some dudes stealing some stuff and trying to get paid for it, and there's going to be hijinks. So that's fun.
Yeah, it's weird that so many of our filmmakers, of our storytellers in this modern era devoted so much of their lives teaching us just how crime works. hey guys, you know what? There's a lot of crime in the world, and this is how it goes down, and this is how people fuck each other up when they're doing crimes. And it's not necessarily the real world, it's some exaggerated storytelling version of it, but it's just interesting how much time they spend showing us that stuff and how much energy we commit to taking it all in.
It's funny you should say that. That's kind of a perfect segue for my show and tell this week, because it is not an exaggeration about how crime works. It is a true story about how crime works that is told, as I understand it, pretty faithfully to the real events. I'm talking about We Own the City from the Wire crew. It's George Pelecanos, David Simon. They're back making a Baltimore crime miniseries.
Oh, cool.
Starring John Bernthal as a Baltimore crooked cop. Wayne Jenkins, based on the real true story of the Baltimore Gun Trace Task Force that was running wild for the better part of a decade in Baltimore. All types of shit. Guns, drugs, money, ripping dealers off nonstop. They were basically operating like a small mob, like the mafia, but just with badges. It's told in several different time periods, following the same characters at different points in their career. A lot of it deals with trying to police a city in the wake of the Freddie Gray catastrophe. And there was like a lot I didn't know about it. Like the Baltimore police force was on basically a work stoppage. They were working but refusing to get out of their cars and make arrests.
Oh, shit.
Post Freddie Gray, because they felt like the cops that handled that situation got a bad deal. So it touches on that. And the guys who were still getting out of the cars got preferential treatment from the bosses. And that leads to the Bernthal character, who's just truly one of the great monsters of television I can remember. He's captivating, he's charismatic, but he's also just a terrible, horrible person. Really good. It's probably like a little bit of a cliche to have a white guy in his 30s tell you about how great The Wire is, but The Wire is like super important to me. So there was no chance I wasn't going to watch this till the end, but it didn't need to have that old allegiance to hook me in, because I think it's my favorite show of the year so far. It's really good.
That's amazing. That snuck up on me. I did not know there was a David Simon thing coming, and this sounds like it's stacked and loaded, and I got to check it out.
You know, I feel like his last few projects have come and gone without a lot of fanfare. They've all been good, but he did Show Me a Hero, which stars Oscar Isaac. It's a miniseries about Yonkers politics, which doesn't sound that interesting, but it was really good. And then he had The Deuce, which I feel like it got a lot of critical acclaim, but wasn't highly watched. So his cachet may have gone down slightly. So a pessimistic person might look at this as him kind of going back to what works, you know, a Baltimore set crime drama. But no, he's got some real stuff to say. And actually, it's not his show. It's Pelecanos' show much more so. He's like an EP on it, but Pelecanos is the showrunner. Cool. And it's just lights out. I can't recommend it highly enough.
Nice. I'm going to check it out for sure.
But now it is time for the movie of the week. We're doing another early 90s comedy sequel to a beloved first movie, like what we did with Addams Family Values. And they came out very close to one another. We're talking Wayne's World 2. Ian, what's your relationship with Wayne's World in general and this movie in specific?
This movie in particular, if you had asked me even a short while ago as a trivia question, did they ever make a sequel to Wayne's World? There would have been a 50-50 chance I got the answer wrong. I didn't know. I was totally familiar with Wayne's World as a movie, the original, and as a phenomenon at the time. You know, I was watching SNL when those things started to come on, and then I definitely saw it back in the day, and I had just a positive impression, lasting impression of the movie. Was like, that was funny. I like those guys. It's lightweight stuff. But then somehow the sequel, even though they rushed it out to get it to me with zero waiting, I had no awareness of it.
It's a funny thing. Wayne's World feels like one of those phenomenons that kind of probably came and went very quickly. I was too young at the time to really understand it, but that might be part of the reason they tried to rush a sequel out so quickly. Is it's very like catchphrase heavy, swing and all that stuff. So that type of stuff, I feel like its expiration date creeps up on you really fast. And they were probably trying to cash in. And I guess, you know, the business this movie did compared to the first one is a good indication of that. But I remember seeing these movies. I think we had them both on VHS. I think my older brother, Steve, had both of them, and we would borrow them and just watch them constantly. And even back then, I was much more in the Wayne's World 2 camp. And you know what? I put myself out there at the end of Malignant and said that I still think this is the better one. And you know what I do? Because it's weird. It's super weird. It's got no discernible storyline, really. It's just like a series of funny little vignettes. It's like an anthology film to me, like a funny scene that has nothing to do with anything else, followed by another funny scene. And I guess at this point in my life, that's what I'm looking for, because it just really works for me.
Yeah. You can only take so many very heavy serialized drama TV shows with characters going through misery for years. This is just like a couple guys. And what's the time frame of this movie? A couple weeks, a month, a year?
If you told me it was like 3 weeks, that would be plausible. If you told me it was 5 years, that would also be plausible, because everything seems to happen in a relatively short amount of time. But then there are some developments that we'll get into that are just like, wait, what?
Wasn't that 2 days ago that she left town? And now what's going on?
Yeah.
Anyway, it's light fare. And the question is, does it really work I don't know. I'm going to preface this, all my takes on this episode, please filter them through the lens of, I had a tough week while I was trying to consume this movie. And so I might not have been in the best mood while I was watching it. And Wayne and Garth, man, they're certainly relentlessly cheery and trying to bring mirth and a lot of lightness to our lives. And maybe it just fell short for me, and maybe that's on me this time. The movie didn't offend me, but it didn't hook me in either. And we'll have to go through and talk about why I think that might have been.
See, I don't know what the better option was, because the next movie we're doing is The Punisher, which is just unendingly grim. So is that better when you're already having a tough time?
Maybe I'll relate to it more. Yeah.
I can't accurately say how much of my fond feelings of this movie are tied to nostalgia.
Right.
It's impossible to disconnect from that because, like I said, this is just one of those movies like Clue that we talked about that I just watched 100 times or more in my youth. But I hadn't seen it in 15 years probably when I sat down to watch this. So
on that point, I think I wanted a little more nostalgia because I was ready to revisit this world from the 90s. And then they came on screen, and it's more so in the first section of the movie. We'll get into it when we go through the story. But did it feel like maybe some of those catchphrases were already lifeless when they started doing them in this movie? Like their hearts weren't in it a little bit? I don't know. That's where I was like,
I'll be perfectly honest. I think the catchphrases never totally worked for me. I never found the schwing funny or the as if. I think what I always admired about the Wayne's World movies is just how weird they can be. Even in the first movie, Ed O'Neill's character just goes on this long monologue about murdering a guy in an opening scene in the donut shop. And that's the stuff I always remember about those movies. Really nothing about the public access show, nothing about their catchphrases or, Heather Locklear. It's all the weird little choices they make. And I think a lot of that is Mike Myers is just an incredibly strange person. And I don't know that my comic sensibilities line up with his 100% of the time, but I just can't imagine a movie like this getting released and making $180 million today because it's so weird.
I think you're right. That was part of his charm, is that he's really weird, and it failed him later in his career, but it worked early in his career. But yeah, he's a little bit of a weirdo. He's like a little bit off-putting, right? Even when he's being very cheery and he's playing a character who's totally good-hearted and optimistic and cheerful and energetic, you're like, what's this guy's deal? What's going on behind that face? That can haunt you when you're watching Mike Myers.
Well, I think that you're very much onto something because he does not have the best reputation for being easy to work with in Hollywood. Like him and Dana Carvey didn't talk for, decades. He got the director of the first Wayne's World movie fired from this one. There's something about him where think about, have you ever seen him play just a guy, So I Married an Axe Murderer, I think is the only movie where he plays like just a normal dude and he's not wearing a wig or a bunch of makeup or prosthetics or talking in a weird voice. I feel like he's a very private person, which makes him such a weird candidate to be a leading man in Hollywood.
There's a few comedians like that. Steve Martin comes to mind as somebody who's like, oh, this guy can be really funny, but there's something off about him. And you wouldn't want to be alone in a room with him.
I mean, he plays the banjo. That's not a red flag. I don't know what is. You don't play the banjo, do you, Ian?
A little bit. I dabbled.
Oh, shit.
In my darker moments.
Yeah, but I think he's an off-putting person, which may be coloring our perception of Wayne.
Or informing it accurately. I
think Wayne's I don't want to say, he does seem like a nice guy, I guess, but he also seems, let's just put it bluntly, like he seems really stupid. Most of the time, he's kind of dim.
He's the smarter of the duo, but he is impervious to the darker realities of the world, except for small moments where he goes, whoa, shit is fucked. And then he snaps right back because everything works out for him. And that's the thing, is that the guy playing him is the guy writing him, and he always makes things good and happy in the end.
On that note, do you want me to get into how this movie came about? It was not the smoothest production. I found out some more interesting details than I thought I would find researching fucking Wayne's World 2.
Cool. Let's hear how this thing happened.
All right. So there is a long and less than prestigious history of SNL skits as movies, and the original Wayne's World movie was one of the few to transcend its source material and become a legitimate cultural phenomenon. The character of Wayne Campbell was thought up by Mike Myers and first appeared in 1987 on a CBC television series called It's Only Rock and Roll in the segment Wayne's Power Minute. Excellent. 2 years later, the character would make its Saturday Night Live debut and become a hit recurring segment for the show. The first Wayne's World movie would release on February 14th, 1982, and was able to overcome its February release date to become a massive hit, grossing $183 million on a $20 million budget, and becoming the Borat of its time, spawning several annoying catchphrases for bros to shout at each other.
They're nice!
While the film was a huge success, its production was not without its difficulties, as the famously prickly Myers clashed with director Penelope Spheris. A sequel was ordered immediately, and Myers began work on the story, envisioning it as a loose adaptation of 1949 British comedy Passport to Pimlico, which would see Wayne and Garth seceding from the U.S. and forming their own country after finding an ancient scroll.
Excuse me?
This iteration of the movie was well into pre-production when Paramount Pictures discovered the movie was based on an existing property and one that they didn't have the rights to use. Trying to purchase the rights at this late hour would have led to massive delays, so Paramount executive Sherry Lansing ordered Myers to rewrite the film immediately, sprinkling in some colorful language like, and I quote, "As I'm sitting here with you, there's a team figuring out how they can take every single thing away from you," end quote. And if I were you, Mike, I'd go to Lauren's office right now and stay there until you come up with a new script. We'll slide food under the door. Denied. Myers managed to get the new story done, now focusing on Wayne and Garth's efforts to get a music festival off the ground. With a budget exactly twice that of the first movie, hopes were high, as the movie was released on December 10th, 1993. Reviews were positive, if slightly less so than on the first movie, but the film faced stiff competition at the box office, as Mrs. Doubtfire was picking up steam, and Sister Act 2 was released the same week. Wayne's World 2 would go on to earn just $73 million, less than half of what the original made, and the Wayne's World movies were shelved indefinitely.
Man, Mrs. Doubtfire.
Yeah. Mrs. Doubtfire, she took out Addams Family Values too.
Right.
It's crazy because I'll get into kind of how it went week by week with Mrs. Doubtfire. It was dropping 15% one week to the next, and then it was just like up 70%. And it didn't change theaters. Just all of a sudden, everyone started going to watch Mrs. Doubtfire.
Yeah.
And it left every other comedy movie in the dust. And even Sister Act 2, I think, made over $100 million. So that was tough competition for Wayne's World 2. I do want to note this is not the first time Sherry Lansing has come up on our podcast as well.
Oh.
Former Mrs. William Friedkin.
Oh.
And the only reason Friedkin was able to make Blue Chips at Paramount,
right.
She was in charge there at the time because he had a famously fraught relationship with the studio because of Sorcerer. Which,
yeah.
For like the fifth time on this podcast, I have to say, fucking rules.
Yeah. Another prickly filmmaker.
More prickly than I don't think Myers has ever punched any of his actors or co-stars in the face.
Difficult people in Hollywood.
That's wild. He was curled up in the fetal position in Sherry Lansing's office, according to Sherry Lansing anyway.
Yeah.
And he vowed never to work with Paramount or her again, and he never did.
Tough business.
So, tough business. Can you imagine being the millionaire star of a hit movie and just somebody screaming at you like that in their office?
That sounds not that sympathetic to all the millions of people who've never worked in an office with a couch in it. You don't have to worry about curling up on anything because there ain't no couches.
You have to assume whatever project he's doing, Mike Myers is going to sneak in some weird little British factoid and have it be an homage to some obscure English production because that's his thing. He lived in England, I think, for a big chunk of his life and is just like a huge Anglophile. He's like obsessed with Monty Python and British comedy.
And that's not a bad thing, taking old properties and reimagining them. It's a problem if you actually lift so much and so literally that you actually have to buy the rights and you didn't bother to tell anybody. But
part of me wonders, though, if they ever would have gotten called out for it, They just changed it enough. Is anyone really going to complain?
I don't know. It sounds like a pretty specific and weird concept. Like, it's not like a basic rom-com thing. Scroll and succeeded from the country? I don't know.
I'll be honest. I'm not going to watch Passport to Pimlico to try to find out how similar it is. I'll just have to trust that.
We'll just imagine.
Yeah, exactly. That's the making of Wayne's World 2. The new director they got, whose name is Steven Surjik, said while they were filming, you could literally hear chainsaws in the background tearing down the sets they had already built for this other iteration of Wayne's World 2.
That's hilarious.
Just wild.
They should have put that on camera. That is like a Wayne's World bit, having another movie being torn down in the background.
Yeah, why not write it into the script? It seems like a perfect opportunity, but they didn't go that route. So we got this movie, which seems like a much more hodgepodge thrown together story about a music festival that's half-baked. This whole movie's very half-baked, but that's part of what I like about it.
It is. I noticed when I went back to refresh myself on the first one, and then I watched the second one, I'm like, oh, this is kind of the same plot. A slick industry guy shows up and tries to lure away Cassandra from Wayne. It was Rob Lowe in the first movie. Now it's Christopher Walken.
Rob Lowe, a little more believable, I think. He plays a better sleazeball than Walken does. Also more age appropriate for Tia Carrere.
Yes. But I don't know. If you get Christopher Walken, you just enjoy what you got.
Good in this. He's a little, I don't know. I feel like so many Christopher Walken performances late in his career are just like drawing attention to the fact that he's Christopher Walken.
Yeah.
But he's playing this role pretty straight. There's not a lot of winking at the audience in it.
There's not. And the guy doesn't do that many outrageous things. He does what he has to do, which is like, hey, I'm trying to get this record made. Why don't you come to Hollywood? That seems reasonable for a record producer who's trying to make this young artist successful. I don't know. Are we going to end up arguing that he's underutilized? They should have made him more outrageous?
More villainous? I don't know. He comes across very sleazy. I think they do a good job of setting up that he's like a scumbag, but he just seems like a run-of-the-mill scumbag. He's not a source of humor. He's a source of conflict, but there's no jokes that arise out of his presence. And you probably could have upped the joke per minute ratio by making him a little funnier, even if we're laughing at him. But as it is, he's just a very competent but sleazy record producer.
The sleaziest thing is his love for Cassandra that he decides to propose. And I don't want to give away any spoilers of the last act of the movie, but he is suddenly a real romantic threat to Wayne. insane.
If you dropped me in 1993, I'd probably fall in love with Tia Carrere too. I mean,
Yeah. Oh, let's start at the top. Do we say Carrere or Carrera? Because I feel like in my youth I called her Tia Carrera, but I haven't heard her name in a long time, so I couldn't remember what was the right way.
How are we going to find this out now? It's too late. I can't Google it.
No, but
in the middle of recording.
We can decide. We can have solidarity within the world of the podcast.
Let's go for Carrera, and then if we need to, you can put your little deep voice corrections over the top.
If we say the slightly longer word, I can cut the end off every time we say it. No one will know the difference.
That sounds like a lot of work. I hope you leave all this in, by the way.
It's going to be like the Wayne bit where he pretends that the fast food microphone is going out on him.
Wait, did our connection just get messed up?
What? I'm having trouble hearing you right now. I don't know what's going on. But I wanted a couple of cinnamon crullers.
I do want a cinnamon cruller, to be honest. That sounds great. Makita's it's an interesting place. It's like a full sit-down restaurant that only serves donuts, but they have the most advanced drive-through technology I've ever seen.
Is that a real thing or based on a real thing, or is that just like my image?
If you'll allow me some clickety-clacks, I can find out.
It feels like something that Mike Myers invested a lot of his worldview into. It's a drive-through diner with a hockey player mascot and a donut menu and Ed O'Neill running the counter. I don't know.
I guess it's supposed to be based on Tim Hortons.
Oh, okay.
Which is interesting because I've been to a Tim Hortons. It did not look like that. I used to live in Buffalo, New York, which is one of the only American cities that has like a bunch of Tim Hortons. They're like Dunkin' Donuts, but just
that was my experience
too.
They're
just Dunkin' Donuts.
Yeah. But yeah, that place has a lot more style. It's like an old-fashioned McDonald's. It's got a lot going on. It's fun. I think that's one of the successful parts of this Wayne's World.
He keeps making up places that I really want to go to, like Comrades, the bar in this movie. That place fucking rules. I would love to hang out there.
I guess we were talking about the budget and where did it go before we rolled, and part of it you mentioned were the sets that they built and then they had to chainsaw apart. But that one place, Comrades, that was probably $10 million right there.
It was an empty warehouse that they converted into a nightclub and bar and a live music place. It's pretty impressive, and I wish it was real.
So much Soviet-era kitsch all over the place. They really did it up.
Do you want to get into the story of the movie? And we can start to argue about what I think is really funny and what you think doesn't work?
Yeah, let's have some fun argue time.
All right.
So Wayne Campbell, played by Mike Myers, is a dude who has a cable access talk show with his friend Garth, played by Dana Carvey. Wayne also has a hot rocker girlfriend named Cassandra, played by Tia Carrere, who is recording her first album with help from smarmy Hollywood record producer Bobby Kahn, played by Christopher Walken. Wayne has a psychedelic dream where Jim Morrison tells him he must stage a rock festival concert in his hometown, so he and Garth go to London and bring back Jim Morrison's old roadie Del Preston to help them create Wayne Stock.
Wayne Stock. If you book them, they will come. Good Jim Morrison impression on the.
Yeah, okay. Actually, Jim Morrison was one of the people I had trouble with in this. Is that a good impression? Because I was trying to. I know he's doing something.
I don't like Jim Morrison as like a person. I think he's a good vocalist. He's, as Rep Taylor would say, more of a crooner. I find his lyrics just dog shit, and I think he was, by all accounts, a pretty terrible person. So I'm not super on board with making him the Jesus figure of this movie.
It was kind of half baked, and I don't know. The guy just reminded me of who's the star of You?
Penn Badgley?
Yeah, he's like Penn Badgley, although he's 30 years.
He does look like Penn Badgley.
Too old. I'm like, is Penn Badgley in Dark Aviators? I'm distracted the whole time he's talking.
Val Kilmer played a good Jim Morrison because Val Kilmer is also like a crazy asshole, much like the real Jim Morrison. But this guy he seems more of a hippie. Like Jim Morrison was a wild man.
Yeah.
Like he was constantly getting in trouble for fights and pulling his dick out and peeing on people. One of those 70s rock stars that was out of control, like John Bonham or somebody. And they just neutered him a little bit, I guess.
He doesn't bring a lot of energy to this. And that gets to my other big point about the whole Jim Morrison dream. That is the inciting incident, in some sense, of this movie, of one of the two main plots, the concert plot. And man, that is some low stakes or low motivation for our hero to set a big goal. He has a weird dream, and then he just looks in the camera and goes, oh, yes, it will happen. That's a Wayne catchphrase I noticed that he did in the first movie, too, where he looks to camera and says, she will be mine. She will be mine. Thank you. That's the thing. But yeah, when it's her, when it's the hot girl that he just fell in love with, you're like, okay, I get the motivation that he would turn to the camera and promise to do this thing. But he just had a stupid, sweaty dream. And it's like, why does he care? Why do we care? And especially because it's a low energy Jim Morrison, it'd be one thing if Freddie Mercury came to him, and I know it was way too soon for them to do a movie with the ghost of Freddie Mercury who had just passed away. But like something where, oh my God, this is Wayne's idol.
Or John Bonham, if we're talking about dead rock stars.
Yeah. Or Jimi Hendrix. Because there was a whole Foxy Lady thing in the first movie, wasn't there?
That's true. Yeah. That was a big set piece in the first Wars movie.
Yeah, so Hendrix would have been good. But they went with Jim Morrison, and then they added Sammy Davis Jr. later just because Tim Meadows.
Hey, the Sammy Davis Jr. cameo was great. Fucking love that scene.
It was great. We are big Tim Meadows stands. We can't get enough Tim Meadows. So I'm not saying don't put Sammy Davis Jr. in there, but it does not add to the actual emotional motivation of the hero. It's just a funny gag.
I think you're overthinking it a little bit. I think they wanted to make a surreal, weird comedy, and they mostly succeeded. But I agree the staging device could have been more thought out. And we've got to talk about the elephant in the room, or rather the naked Indian in the room. The naked Indian's kind of offensive. I know Indian was the accepted nomenclature at the time, not Native American, which is the more acceptable, but also just like the constant references to him are unnecessary and not really funny.
Yeah, it's heavy-handed and it's overdone, even if there was not that issue.
The only time I found it funny is when Rip Taylor can see him too and is talking to him.
Yeah.
I love everything Rip Taylor does in this movie.
Rip Taylor is a breath of fresh air for an old guy who was a dated reference in 93. Was one of the people who brings life to this movie.
He pops up in one of the Jackass movies at the end, and he's great in that too.
Oh, really?
Rip Taylor fucking ruled. I love that guy. So the Morrison and his companion stuff, not the strongest part of the movie. I will grant you that. Everything else, I'm on board with. But let's talk about their loft. Did this inspire like 1,000 Adam Sandler character living spaces? This is like a living space that only exists in movies.
Yeah.
Huge open lofts with sunken living rooms, bedrooms up a staircase off to the side. It's super cool. I've never actually seen a place like this in real life.
Yeah, it's so deluxe. Like I didn't even register what was going on. I had to watch the movie twice to be like, oh, they're living there, but it's not a story about his incredible riches and transformation into some superstar. It's just, oh yeah, and by the way, we have our own place now. And Garth's all, yeah, I changed my own underpants now. That was the big thing, not look at this fucking insane cocaine palace that we live in.
They kept being like, oh, we got to make something of ourselves. And I'm like, dude, look around you. You have.
You've made it, boys.
You live in a $7,000 a month apartment, even if it's in Aurora. I don't know if is it supposed to be in Aurora or in Chicago.
I think they're still in Aurora, right?
Even in Aurora, $6,000 a month, easy.
Yeah, once you have to doll it up like that and you get the whole floor of the building.
They get an elevator right to their floor. Doesn't get any better than that.
Pretty nice.
I'm going to pull up Trulia in Aurora, Illinois. And see. No, I'm not going to do that. So that's a little unbelievable that they're complaining that they haven't made anything of themselves while they're living in this fucking palace. But again, it's a movie. And I feel like it took a long time for movie studios and TV studios to catch up to how people really live. And I don't even know if they ever actually did. Because you look at shows like How I Met Your Mother, where they're supposed to be struggling in New York, just living in these palatial estates.
Yeah, there's some kind of curtain of unreality that clouds the eyes of Hollywood movie and show makers. Maybe that's what we want to see. Maybe the audience demands it. We don't want to see things too real.
Always Sunny, I guess, is the closest we come to what an actual bar owner in Philadelphia could afford. But it's hard to fit a camera in there. So it makes it tough to film, I guess.
That's true.
Then they go to Makita's Donuts, and we get the drive-through joke we referenced earlier. This is good stuff.
I like that there was like an actual joke, and the joke is on them, and it's not all them being in control. Because I don't know where I'm going with this thought, but I feel like they should be the butt of most of the jokes and only win at the end. But part of what maybe Mike Myers does in writing this stuff is make it safe by never putting them in too much jeopardy, by keeping them safe throughout the movie. Even though they keep going into these situations that are emotionally and socially dangerous, where they should be vulnerable, they're going backstage at shows where they don't quite fit in and belong, but then they keep winning in all those situations, and that somehow dilutes the tension that should be there in the movie.
Do you think that's just Myers' ego? Like he doesn't want to play vulnerable or defeated?
It could be. That would be a little bit harsher way to look at it. Maybe you could also spin it just that he wants the movie to be fun and light at all times and not to feel that emotional jeopardy for his characters too deeply.
Yeah, I do think they wanted to make these movies like breezy and not stressful, which they're not. Like they're very light. We keep using the word light to describe them, but they truly are like feather light. There's no emotional weight to any of these scenes, which is fine though. I feel like maybe just because I'm watching like Under the Banner of Heaven and We Own the City and Better Call Saul, I just want to like, relax and laugh at some people doing dumb stuff for an hour and a half.
Yeah.
But now we come to my biggest problem with Wayne's World in general, both the skits, the show, both movies, is that the bands that they're big fans of just don't make sense to me. We get them backstage at a concert. They're going crazy. They're super excited to go see this band. And do you know who the band is, Ian? Can you tell the audience?
The band is Aerosmith.
Do you buy these guys in 1993 being super into Aerosmith? It seems weird, right? That doesn't seem like the kind of band these young, I don't want to say hip, but, like tuned into the music scene would be like going crazy for. That's like your mom's favorite band in 1993.
I think you are absolutely correct. But I think if we look, it doesn't take very long to get to the bottom of that because
they agreed to be in the movie.
well, that's a very important observation too. But what I was going to say is Mike Myers and Dana Carvey are A, not hip, and B, not young. They're just playing these characters.
How old were they when this movie came out? Like, I thought they were like younger than 30.
So if I did my math right, in 92 and 93, when the two movies happened, Myers was 29 to 30. Carvey was 37 to 38.
Holy shit.
He's a boomer. He's a 50s baby.
Yeah. Is he the greatest generation, actually? Is Dana Carvey 70 fucking years old right now? What is going on?
Yeah, they're not young. And it's weird when I flip back and forth between the two movies, Mike Myers looks actually noticeably older. It's 1 year after, but he definitely looks older in the second movie to me.
Did you hear my monologue? He got fucking screamed at and threatened to have his life ruined.
Oh, that could have been it.
Probably added some years to his face.
That'll put some bags under your eyes for sure.
Look, I feel like their characters should be into like Slayer and Metallica and White Zombie and those type of bands.
Yeah.
That's the way they're portrayed as like metalheads. But then like in the first movie, they're crazy for Alice Cooper, who for all his theatrics was never like a heavy metal musician. He played like almost like glam rock, really. And then Aerosmith, who was just pretty washed up by now.
These are corny choices. They're not cool choices, but that's true of the other cultural references too. These guys are not actually hipsters at all. You could have definitely taken them in a hipster direction and made them much more interesting in that way to a young audience. But Rip Taylor is one example.
I will hear no besmirchment of Rip Taylor. I'm sorry.
But just like the commercials that they referenced later where they do jokes on old TV commercials, and even for 93, they all feel like old references. They're like commercials from the 70s and 80s. So they're like these 30-something guys referencing their youth. So that's classic rock. And then some hangers on from classic rock like Aerosmith.
You look at a movie that's occupying a similar space the next year in 1984, which was Airheads, also with famed SNL alum Adam Sandler in one of the lead roles. That's not a good movie. It's a movie that has a lot of nostalgia for me like this one. But the music choices in that movie make a lot more sense. They go to a White Zombie concert, stuff, I feel like they actually paid attention to the scene that they were trying to reference, put a little bit of care and research into it.
Yeah. But can you imagine Mike Myers paying attention to the actual hard rock metal music scene in 92?
One thing about Mike Myers is I think he makes up his own reality in every situation.
Yeah.
And he just expects us to follow along.
Yeah. It's pretty powerful. It's definitely worked for him.
Most of the time. Again, I feel like I've only been ragging on this movie. I actually like this movie a lot.
I know.
Get into some stuff I like.
Yeah. Let's get into somebody that you like and then I'll do the ragging.
Oh, man. Ian does not like Del Preston. And that just brings me great pain because I love this character. I find him hilarious.
I wish I
love
could.
His long monologues that all end with him beating somebody to death with a shoe. His repetitive stories, everything about it, his monotone delivery. I find him enrapturing.
If you're trying to follow along and you haven't watched this lately, this is the old Roadie. They go to London. They bring back this guy because he's going to help them execute Jim Morrison's vision. And he's this aging rocker dude who's
younger than Dana Carvey, by the way.
Yeah.
Born in 57. Ralph Brown is.
But yeah, he has this very droll English delivery. I don't know. I wanted to like him. I should have maybe liked him, but somehow it just irritated me. I'm like, oh God, okay. And then when his gag was that he repeated the long, slow, boring stories, I'm like, oh no, we're doing it again. I couldn't get on his vibe.
I feel like I watched this movie as more of an ensemble. And so maybe these little diversions into these weird side characters work better for me. Because while the first movie is very much Wayne and Garth's story, I don't know. I found this one to be much more of an ensemble piece. Chris Farley's doing good character work in this.
Mm-hmm.
You got James Hong playing a pretty big part. All of Wayne's hangers on, the fellow roadies. They get a little bit more to do in this one, I feel like, than they did in the first one. So I don't know. If you watch it like that, I don't know. It works for me. I love Del Preston.
Yeah.
He's sleeping like a bat upside down when they first find him.
Is he? Oh, I even missed that aspect of it. Yeah.
Yeah, he's got those ankle straps, you
okay.
hang in a doorway or whatever.
Yeah.
He's just sound asleep.
Well, I'm not going to take anything away from Del Preston for you. Maybe some point I'll come back to this film and I will find a love for him because you would think based on I have a taste of that Anglophilia that Mike Myers seems to embrace. And I don't know, I should like this guy, but he just rubbed me the wrong way.
Yeah, Mike Myers loves British stuff. I've never been to the UK, but I would love to go. I almost went once. I was in Paris and I wanted to take the Channel, but my sister was scared. She's claustrophobic.
Oh, no. Can't get
she
caught in
wouldn't
the
do it.
tunnel. But yeah, got to get over there. I've had a little chance to visit, and all I wanted to do was go back and do more of that.
Maybe someday. All right. Is there anything else from this section we wanted to touch on, or do you want to get into the middle part of the movie?
Let's get to James Hong.
James Hong. He might be taking Larry Fishburne's spot as the patron saint of Blast Zone.
Yeah,
Because he's
working for it.
racking up the appearances. Okay. Wayne and Garth start the heavy work of setting up Wayne's stock. Wayne meets Cassandra's dad and earns his respect by facing off in martial arts combat. Garth is seduced by a woman at the laundromat named Honey Hornet, played by Kim Basinger, who ends up trying to use him to kill her husband. Wayne becomes jealous of Cassandra's time with Bobby, so he spies on her and accuses her of cheating on him. Then, as a way of accepting his suggestion that they break up, Cassandra punches him in the face. That about sums it up.
Sorry, I listened to you reading through that section of the synopsis. I must have been really pissed at the movie while I was reading this part. I'm like, I'm making John read this stuff. And they're like, it's just declarative sentences. Wayne does this. Garth does that. Cassandra does this. I'm like, oh man, I really cheaped out on you in this section. I made that not fun to read. I'm sorry.
It's all right. We'll make up for it now when we're discussing the points. We're going over.
We got through it. Got through it quick.
So James Hong, I love him in this, but you're not so sure. You're not sold on his appearance in this movie, which I find hard to believe.
No, I loved him. Let me not take anything away. James Hong is always awesome, and this was a fun thing. He plays such a range of characters. It's delightful what he brings to every role. The part that I had trouble with was just that they leaned so hard into this kung fu movie stereotype thing. I'm like, should I be okay with this? Is all of this okay to chew on so heavy-handedly? And I think it is. It's a real genre that contains these extremes of melodramatic fighting, and I happen to love that genre too. But it was a little bit drawn out. It was like, oh, maybe they're hanging on this too long. This fight scene was hard.
I could see it being drawn out, but I do think what the movie is referencing, it does so with love and like a real reverence for the source material, which is why it didn't feel mean-spirited or racist in any way. When they switch from like subtitles to dubbing, I found that really funny. Like, it's James Hong, like he's clearly having fun with it. He's not holding back. He never does. So I couldn't help it. And like when I saw this as a kid, I don't know who the fuck James Hong was. Like he meant nothing to me back then. This is probably the first movie I ever saw him in. Now I'm watching it and I'm like, I have so much more attachment to him as an actor. So it worked even more so for me because he rules.
Yeah, I'm definitely my net impression of him and his role in this movie is that it's great and it adds a lot.
That's my impression of Kim Basinger as well. She's great and she adds a lot.
She is fun. She has a really silly role.
I think she shot for 3 days, she said. They brought her in. They had everything ready to go. She shot for 3 days on the movie, even though she's probably like the fourth lead or something.
Yeah. But also she comes and goes. She's just this side story for Garth. She accosts him in a laundromat. Instantly falling
I wouldn't say
for him.
She accosts him. She's just flirting with him.
He flirts with him, yeah.
Threatening at that point. Yeah.
Maybe I used that word wrongly, but she comes on to him hard because that's part of the joke of Garth is that somehow really attractive women are attracted to him.
His tiny underwear because he put them in the dryer for too long. The tiny underwear got me.
Yeah, that was funny. At the end, he's cleaning up his stuff and he just makes an offhand remark like, oh, they were in there for a long time. Like he's taking his laundry out of the dryer and he says, oh, it went for 2 hours or something. And then she hands him this little teeny tiny underpants. That was one of my favorite images from the movie.
I will say, 1993 Kim Basinger, I probably would have killed her husband for her.
She was a hottie.
Can't guarantee one way or the other, but if I was in Garth's position, I might have taken that gun and done the deed.
I mean, that's one thing Mike Myers and the producer and director were able to do is stock this movie with great cameos, including a number of very attractive women. Kim Basinger and Drew Barrymore's amazing in this and in her little cameo role.
She does a lot with her tiny role as her comically Swedish name. Hold on, I'm going to find it. Björgen Kjörgen.
Oh, yeah.
From Kavergen, near the Fjörgen fjords or whatever. Like, that stuff's fun. That's when the movie does not care what any of this has to do with anything. Harry Shearer pops up in that scene too, right? Isn't Drew Barrymore Harry Shearer's like assistant?
She's the receptionist somewhere. Is it at the radio station?
I thought it was at the radio station.
Yeah, no, I think you're probably right. I was distracted.
Harry Shearer, they just put so much Brill cream in his hair. Like, it looks so greasy.
Yeah. What's his name? Handsome Dan?
Handsome Dan, yeah.
And they go out of their way to make him not handsome.
Poor Harry Shearer. Imagine being cast as that. And then Ted McGinley is Mr. Scream, whose job is to just scream. Like, that stuff is great to me. I don't know. I enjoy all those little, like, they mean nothing to the movie in general, but they're just fun.
Yeah. That was silly and fun. That's where the more silly the movie gets and the more it goes on tangents, the more it does meta humor, the more I like it. I'm like, yeah, more of this. I'm like the sicko outside your window going, yes, haha, yes. It's just that sometimes the movie didn't give me as much as I wanted of that.
We also get to see the most of Chris Farley, I think, in this section at the comrades party to raise money for the permits. I don't know. It made me sad to see him for obvious reasons because, you know,
Sure.
he passed away so young. Also, I feel like this might be a silly thing to say about Wayne's World too, but I feel like this was a glimpse of what we could have gotten from him. The jokes aren't based on his appearance or like him falling down. You know, the jokes are all dialogue based. He's saying funny things and that's why it's funny. And I feel like he didn't get to do that as much.
Not as much.
Like he gives this great monologue at them about, I don't know, I hate my father. You know, my life's falling apart, but I'm having a good time. It's a great party. I'm going to go pick a fight. He just like stomps off.
Yeah. He was great at that kind of stuff. Those turns, dramatic turns.
We'll get more of him when we finally cover Airheads. But yeah, I don't know. It's always a little bittersweet to see him in movies. Cherish the stuff we did get, but
yeah, for sure.
He's one of the great what ifs in Hollywood of what we missed out on.
Yeah.
And Mike Myers stole Shrek from him.
He did?
Yeah, Shrek was like mostly done with Chris Farley.
Oh, okay. I do remember that story now. I had forgotten that was part of Shrek's lore.
And he passed and they had to re-record everything. So Mike Myers made Shrek Scottish and recorded all the dialogue.
Wow.
He didn't steal it from him, obviously. He was dead. I'm not accusing Mike Myers of any impropriety, even though he did steal Dr. Evil from Dana Carvey and didn't cast him in the movie.
Apparently, yeah.
Damaged their friendship for decades. We can get into that more later. Did I did sidetrack us and make us sad with that?
Yeah, we're a little bit wistful now, but let's bring the spirit back up. And speaking of Mike Myers doing accents, there's a bit in here. Like you said, most of the Wayne's World actual cable show stuff in this movie is not terribly funny, but there's a bit where he's on tape.
I'm the leprechaun.
He's doing the leprechaun and he's scaring the shit out of Garth being a leprechaun with a flashlight under his chin. And that was like really funny. I'm like, oh, this is funny. Wayne's World, the show can be funny when it's the two of them really bouncing off each other. I love that. And I was like, oh, I wish there was more of that energy in the cable access part.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I always thought they made like the Wayne's World show segments bad on purpose and not funny on purpose to give you maybe a window into why these guys aren't more successful at what
that
they're
might
doing,
be.
even though they live in. But then, yeah, the leprechaun bit is hilarious. So it throws my whole perception of their show off. I don't really know what to believe anymore.
Yeah, the leprechaun show is the explanation for part of the plot, which is, oh, guess what? Actually, Wayne has tons of fans in the community and they love him and they'll go to whatever show he puts on because of him. And that's the reason why when you see that clip.
Yeah, I think they just needed to decide if the Wayne's World show was good or bad, and they never quite did. So we get glimpses of both.
Yeah, totally.
And it's a little uneven. Then we get another funny bit right after that is when they're spying on Cassandra and Bobby having lunch, and they're all dressed up like different administrative workers or, like civil servants.
Yeah, they're in some very reasonable disguises.
Very reasonable disguises. Very true to life, not flamboyant at all. Wayne is dressed as a construction worker working on a telephone pole. I did like that Cassandra notices him immediately. And does she say, is that Wayne? Or does she just notice someone like taking pictures of them? I think she thinks it's Wayne, right?
Does she spot him? Because, he's across the street. He's 30 feet up a telephone pole or a lamppost. And he's got a big mustache on. And,
that's his only costume is he's got a hard hat and a mustache, but he's still very much Wayne Campbell. So then they all start running. I believe Garth is dressed as a crossing guard.
Well, you might mistake him for a crossing guard. He's actually a motorcycle cop. You look closely. He has some of them riding boots and a helmet. And then what are the other guys?
Well, one of them is he's wearing all leather.
There's a leather motorcycle dude.
Is he just a motorcycle dude? And then who's the fourth guy?
We should have brought up his
cowboy?
He can't be a cowboy. Wait, we got to see this.
Cowboy's not very... He's a sailor.
Oh,
he's dressed like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man with the little hat and the little tie and everything. He's dressed exactly like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man.
So he blends in perfectly to this urban street scene until the four of them start running down the sidewalk together. And you're like, wait a minute. I've seen that pattern of outfits before. And where are they heading into now?
So they find themselves in a gay bar.
Yeah.
They are trying to run out the back door when the DJ spots them and puts on the YMCA. And they all know the dance moves instinctively. Not just the YMCA part, though, like the verses and everything, too.
Yeah, they've got a whole choreography going down. It's pretty good.
But somehow they don't get caught by Bobby, who's in the club with them. He doesn't think to look up at the stage.
I think he's looking at them, isn't he? He just decides that, like, the crowd loves them too much and I can't fuck with them in this club.
If he tries to.
Yeah,
okay, that makes more sense.
I think that's what it was. It wasn't really clear because it's just kind of him standing around. They don't have him say anything because the scene, as it should be, is focused around these guys doing a song and dance number on stage, and it's pretty fun. YMCA is such a cliched song. Like, you can't listen to it.
It's ubiquitous.
It's still actually fun to see them doing the dances, and the crowd loves them. And they, I guess, in the end, box Bobby out, and he goes, okay, forget it.
The YMCA has to be deployed strategically, but when utilized correctly, it can still be a good time.
Yeah.
So I think they used it well. I think that's it for this section.
All right. With Cassandra now off in Hollywood working on her record with Bobby, Wayne and Garth focus on preparing for the music festival. But despite lots of hard work, no one's bought tickets, and none of the artists, except for Rip Taylor, have signed on. On the day of the show, fans start lining up, but there's still no bands. Wayne finds out that Cassandra's getting married, and he has to leave the festival and rush to break up her wedding. He breaks Cassandra out of the church, and, insisting that the movie has a happy ending, they go back to the concert, where Aerosmith shows up at the last minute and wows the crowd.
I love that we don't know if any we see like Pearl Jam show up too or something. Like we start seeing other bands come.
Do we?
Point. I was gonna say a lot of those limos that show up at the end are bands, but like Pearl Jam, they're not famous for how they look. Like Steven Tyler is very recognizable, but like grunge bands are a little harder to spot in a crowd.
That's true.
But yeah, we do start seeing some other bands show up at the end. I was gonna say it'd be funny if like they leave it as just Aerosmith shows up, they play like 4 songs. That's what you do at a festival, and then they just leave and there's no one else.
And I hope that was enough. But then Cassandra can finish it out because she's back with him by the end.
Yeah, Crucial Taunt will be there to play, and she'll be in her wedding dress. I was shocked that they didn't go that route of having her play in her wedding dress. I thought that would have been like a good visual for the end of the movie.
Now that you say that, I actually expected to see her play and like that be the true celebration, because that was the way the first movie wrapped up, was that they arranged for the special performance so that she could get discovered, and here would be another chance for a special performance to be celebrated.
I guess we don't see her play in this movie at all, whereas we get a lot of Crucial Taunt footage in the first one. Yeah,
that was a good part of the first movie, and I think there's a few moments of her in this movie in one of the clubs.
In the studio, you get her.
Or in the studio, yeah.
She's a Grammy-winning singer, so she's no slouch. When Crucial Taunt was playing, they sounded good.
They were cool. That was an enjoyable part, and they spent some time with her singing in the first movie, and I liked that.
2-time Grammy-winning
Amazing.
Carrere. Yeah, she could do it all. This section has a lot of funny stuff. I feel this section really leans into the silliness with the second Presbyterian church and the first Presbyterian church gag. But before we get to that gag, I did like swapping out the actors at the gas station. The first guy shows up and he's like, Gordon Street. Mike Myers is like, do we have to put up with this? I know it's a small part, but can't we get a better actor? And they bring out fucking Charlton Heston, which is just, it's very funny. I don't know. Like watching Mike Myers be so elated to have a good actor delivering these lines was endearing. That whole bit worked for me.
Yeah.
And then I don't know if it was intentionally funny that he tells him the church is like 7 blocks away. Was he say like 5 up, 2 over?
Exactly.
But then his car runs out of gas and he's jogging for what seems like miles.
He's jogging forever. Yeah. After driving for a while.
He runs out of gas.
Yeah.
Well, he just left a gas station and then he's jogging for miles to get to the church. That's another one where like the perception of space and time in this movie is a little warped.
And it's really fun. Like I love that stuff, but it was harder to digest it because there wasn't that much of it until this end section.
Also, why are Bobby and Cassandra getting married? Like that's the least believable part of this movie.
There's one scene that sets it up earlier where Christopher Walken's like, did you consider my proposition? It's kind of couched where you don't know that he's necessarily talking about trying to marry her. But yeah, she's been gone a few days in Hollywood.
Right,
and
that's what it seems like.
She's already not only decided to get married, but put on a full wedding, and it's happening now.
With both their families. One thing, I can't remember what section this was in, but the roadie training montage I really enjoyed, where Dell is shooting tennis balls at the roadies, trying to get them stage ready. And then Chris Farley has his big meltdown. Because I've got nowhere else to go is a line I said a lot as a little kid. I bet it was really annoying.
That's some classic 90s comedy stuff, and it's a good time. The pain of the tennis balls hitting them felt real. I was cringing.
But then I feel like Chris Farley gets so many more tennis balls than everyone else did. Like they all got like maybe 3 while they're trying to pick up the mic stand, and then there's like just 30 shooting at him as he's trying to pick it up.
That was painful.
I don't know. It's never not funny when someone's getting pelted with tennis balls. And then Rip Taylor shows up now, of course. I did like that his stories are so long-winded that Wayne's not even excited to have him around anymore after like 10 minutes.
I was still excited.
He's great. His bit about Jim Morrison. The fact that Rip Taylor had never heard of Jim Morrison in this movie is also hilarious to me.
Yeah.
So I had to go listen to some of his stuff. That fucking monologue. And then, of course, speaking of Jim Morrison, this is where we get Tim Meadows and Sammy Davis Jr. I don't know if the impression's good, but like just the lines they give him are incredible. Yeah. I got a split man. I got some cats I got to hang with. What a great way to leave a fucking conversation. I'm going to start using that.
Yeah, that's all purpose, man. I will get you out of anything.
I got a split. I got some cats I got to hang with. Man, I fucking love Tim Meadows. This is just now me devolving into saying things I liked. Remember when this happened? That was good. I like that.
That's our ode to Chris Farley right there. That was awesome.
Yeah, it's awesome. That's pretty much the end of the movie, right?
Oh, yeah. So there's the alternate endings. I didn't even mention that in the synopsis.
Yeah, you went bare bones as synopsis. You were really fed up with this movie, but you said down.
I'm sorry. I did not have a lot of patience. I'm sorry to you and all the fans of the movie who I've shortchanged.
That was from the first movie too, I'm pretty sure. They did that as well. The Scooby-Doo ending in the first one. This one was Thelma and Louise.
Right.
The first one was the Ishtar ending.
Yeah, there's an Ishtar ending. I kind of made the connection. I'm like, oh, that kind of reminds me of Ishtar. Stranded in the desert with some vultures.
Vultures.
Very Ishtar moment. And then they're like, oh, the movie can't end this way. Let's do Thelma. But it's weird. Should he have said, let's do Thelma and Louise, or should they let us discover that he was doing it? Because then they did a full-on note-for-note recreation of the Thelma and Louise ending.
I think if you're going to go that literal with the recreation of it, you can show and not tell, and maybe it's a little funnier. But I think they established a format with the first one and the Scooby-Doo ending thing and all that stuff, so they kind of had to give it a name.
Okay, yeah.
Keeping with the spirit. But I agree, it probably would have been a little funnier if they had just showed it out of nowhere. Also, there's no explanation for why they're being chased by the cops.
Yeah, none of it makes sense, but it was just an excuse to make Wayne and Garth Thelma and Louise. Yeah, and I'm sure it was funnier then when the reference was much fresher and hotter.
I think it's still pretty funny. Yeah.
Okay. And then they're like,
I
oh,
like
we're not.
Thelma and Louise, though. It's a good movie.
Was it just those two endings? And then they go, no, it has to be a happy ending.
Yeah, we want a happy ending.
Third time's a charm.
That's when we get Aerosmith showing up and playing their one song set and then leaving with no other bands to play. Also, I love how quick Aerosmith literally walks out of their limo and just gets on stage and they're all sound checked. Their gear is set up. Everything's ready to go.
Well,
but, it's a movie. I guess you can't show all that stuff.
The roadie training really paid off. Those guys were on their game.
I guess. Oh, and we forgot to mention Garth ends up with his doppelganger from the permit's office.
They just threw that in. Did she look that much like him when we first meet her in the permit office?
Yes. She always looks like him. That's her look. Man,
I did so much injustice to this movie. That was another thing that I could get that she was a female Garth in the end, but I'm like, I remember there being a weird girl in that office, but I didn't remember that she was a lookalike. I was missing a lot in this movie.
Heather Locklear was briefly in the movie? I don't even remember that.
Oh, thank God. You redeemed me. So there was something that I noticed that you didn't. So
yeah, where was she?
She was at one of the parties. You know what? I can't tell you where she was. I remember Garth ogles her butt, and then she turns around, and it's her, and that's all I remember. It was
Heather Locklear was a big part of the SNL sketches, I remember.
Yeah, that was like his dream girl.
Yeah, they were really into Heather Locklear. And that's Wayne's World. I liked it.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with it. It was fine. Is that okay? Can we have a podcast where Ian just goes, that movie was fine? Because that sounds like I'm not engaged enough with the movie.
You know what? We don't cover good or bad movies on this. We just cover movies that lost money. So some of them are just going to be fine. And that's okay. And that's what this movie was for you. And that's okay. Do you want to see what the ramifications of this movie's failure were?
Yeah, because there's some big names in here. And it seems like some of them went on to bigger things, but not everybody.
Not everybody. So Steven Surjik was the director. He was the director, I think, of most of the early run of Kids in the Hall. Clearly a big Canadian comedy guy to be working with the Kids in the Hall so closely. And I think Mike Myers' brother was in Kids in the Hall, Paul Myers. He was at least affiliated with them. And Mike Myers was asked to join Kids in the Hall and said no.
Interesting.
Wayne's World 2 was the first movie he ever directed. Clearly, like, handpicked by Myers probably after he forced out the previous director. And he's mostly stuck to TV since then, but he's been working pretty nonstop. He's done work for Burn Notice, Warehouse 13, Person of Interest, Umbrella Academy, all the Netflix Marvel shows. He directed a few episodes each. So staying busy, but not a huge star.
No, but that's a pretty solid career.
He pops up in this movie. He's the guy who forces the first actor doing the Gordon Street monologue out of the shot and brings in Charlton Heston. The guy playing the director is actually the director.
Oh, nice. So I got to go back and see him.
Yeah, he gets his cameo. So it was written by Myers with Bonnie and Terry Turner, who were a husband and wife screenwriting duo, who were pretty prolific. They created Third Rock from the Sun and That 70s Show. So they're probably caked up. That means wealthy for our listeners who are not up on the vernacular.
I had to infer that, but seriously, if you own these shows.
Syndicated shows, that's where the money is. They were both SNL staff writers from 86 to 92, and they helped write Coneheads, both Wayne's World movies, Tommy Boy, and the Brady Bunch movie, which I remember really liking and thinking was underrated because it was kind of like a meta send-up of the Brady Bunch while also being like a Brady Bunch movie.
So, I mean, Coneheads not distinguishing themselves. Most of everything else on there is pretty impressive.
Yeah. I don't know how well Tommy Boy's aged, but I obviously liked it very much as a child.
Yeah, me too.
They're credited as creators of that upcoming show they're making. That's that 90s show, but I don't know how much they actually do with it or if they just get credit because they created that 70s show. They're very elderly now. They're in like their 90s 70s and 80s.
Oh, okay.
So they might just be chilling, collecting checks.
Yeah, good for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get into the actors. So Myers was coming off So I Married an Axe Murderer, which was an even bigger bomb than this one, actually.
Mm-hmm.
He did Wayne's World, which was a huge hit. So I Married an Axe Murderer, bombed. That came out in July 1993, so not too much earlier than this, only about 5 months earlier. And this would be his last movie until Austin Powers, which was 97.
Wow.
So he took a good amount of time off, good chunk of time.
Yeah.
He starred in some weird movies, man, that I'd never heard of looking this up. He starred in an Irish drama called Pete's Meteor in 1998. That sounds frankly made up, but it's real. It's on IMDb. Then he would obviously do the Austin Powers sequel, which was even bigger than the first one. Then Shrek and its many sequels, obviously all huge hits. Your mileage may vary on some of the later ones and whether or not they're good, but they all made a fuck ton of money. And Goldmember, which is the worst of the Austin Powers movies by a mile, in my opinion, but still made a bunch of money.
Sure.
But he had trouble finding hits outside of those franchises. He made The Cat in the Hat, which is a fucking abomination and also a huge bomb at the box office. I think they spent over $100 million in that and barely recouped the budget, so ended up losing a ton of money in the long run. And some movie called View from the Top, which is about flight attendants, I think. Gwyneth Paltrow. I remember the trailer vaguely. I never saw it.
I thought maybe he was arm wrestling Sly Stallone in that, but I think that was a slightly different title.
God, I wish. And then he was in 54, which is a movie we'll have to cover one day, about the Studio 54 Club in Manhattan.
Oh, I did not connect that.
That was his big dramatic breakout. He was playing, who was the club's promoter?
Bunch of credits.
Yeah, but he's all in heavy prosthetics for these or just doing voice. And then you can't forget about The Love Guru, of course, which we'll unfortunately have to watch one day to do an episode about.
Oh, boy.
Because it's one of the biggest bombs of all time. But it's a movie I truly dread ever having to watch.
Me too.
You remember that movie when it came out. It was a big deal because of how bad it was.
Yeah, that was all there was being said about it, was like, what the fuck is this shit?
One of Justin Timberlake's first acting roles too, I think.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, he pulled out of it.
Being in there. Yeah. Him and Romany Malco, who I enjoy a lot. And other stuff. So that was 2008. His big comeback was Bohemian Rhapsody, which was just, 2019?
That's a lot later.
He was Ray Foster, Queen's manager. He got some good reviews for that role. I thought he was fine in it. I didn't like the movie overall. It's a very homogenized telling of the Queen story.
Yeah, but he was a fun part and his scenes were fun.
Yeah, and he was actually really interesting in Inglourious Bastards in a very, very small role.
Ooh,
he has literally one scene with Michael Fassbender, but again, wearing prosthetics and doing a British accent.
I got to go back and look for him in that.
He did pop up as Austin Powers and Dr. Evil in Space Jam: A New Legacy, which the less said about that movie, the better. And he's popped up as Wayne in some Super Bowl commercials.
Okay.
And then, as we alluded to, he just released the Pentavarite, which is weirdly based on the subplot from So I Married an Axe Murderer. There was a conspiracy about them in that movie.
Oh.
And then 30 years later, he makes a Netflix miniseries about them, which is getting pretty bad reviews, to be honest.
That's too bad.
It's, again, him playing like 5 or 6 different characters and prosthetics and doing accents and all that stuff. It's apparently quite gross, too. You see his dick quite a bit. So if you're looking to see some Mike Myers wiener, if you're looking to see Mike Myers, Oscar Mayer, you can check out the Pentavarite. I don't know if it's a prosthetic or if it's his actual penis, but I'm not going to be the one to find out.
I was almost ready to check that out, but now I'm not so sure.
I've heard mixed things. It has a low rating on Rotten Tomatoes, but some critics that I respect have given it mixed reviews, saying that there is some good stuff. Carvey never really got his movie career off the ground. He's a podcaster like us now. He's doing Fly on the Wall, where he interviews old SNL cast members or hosts, and he actually just had Mike Myers on.
Oh.
And that seemed like a burying the hatchet moment between them. Even though they've appeared in commercials as Wayne and Garth recently, they apparently had not buried the hatchet until very recently.
Oh, really? Okay.
And the source of their strife is that Dr. Evil is based on Dana Carvey's Lorne Michaels impression. And when Myers said he wanted to use it, Carvey assumed, I guess, that he would be asked to play Dr. Evil in the movie, which makes sense. But Myers just said, no, I'll play both parts, and cut him out and took his impression and made all the money off of it.
Yeah, that hurts. Dr. Evil really worked for Mike Myers. It's a shame to know that he lifted the character from his friend and then just kind of cut him out of it.
I mean, does it gain anything that it's Mike Myers playing the character and also playing Austin Powers? You know, like, I think it would have been just as successful a character with Dana Carvey doing it, maybe. I don't find Carvey that charming in acting roles, to be perfectly honest, but
he can ring a little bit hollow when he has to carry more than Garth level stuff.
Yeah, and he looks like Paul McCartney was shrunken down. Paul McCartney with like a much smaller head.
If Paul McCartney had been in that laundromat dryer for 2 hours with the teeny underpants, he would have.
Yeah, Paul McCartney is a grape. Dana Carvey is like the raisin that was made from that grape. I don't know where I'm going with this. This is just my impressions of him. But anyway, so after Wayne's World 2, he starred in Clean Slate, which I'd never heard of. It was disliked heavily and was a bomb. Actually, I can't say for sure it was a bomb because the budget wasn't made public, but it made like $4 million. So we can assume. The Road to Wellville, which was a bomb. I think that's a Anthony Hopkins movie, weirdly enough, an Anthony Hopkins comedy that I'd never heard of. Yeah, I don't know. It sounds terrible. A Christmas-themed crime comedy called Trapped in Paradise that stars Dana Carvey, John Lovitz, and Nicolas Cage. Again, that sounds completely made up. I refuse to believe this is a real movie.
The Nick Cage twist got me.
Chime in at any time if you've ever heard of any of these movies, by the way.
Oh, no, I definitely have not.
His breakout/comeback was supposed to be Master of Disguise, which I do remember.
Yeah, I have heard of that one.
It was so bad. It opened up against the second week of Austin Powers and Goldmember, which seems mean. Why would you do that to Dana Carvey? Make him open against his old friend's blockbuster franchise. Obviously underperformed. I thought it made less money than it actually did. It made more than its budget. It didn't double its budget, but it made more than I anticipated. But it was widely hated. It has a 1% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yikes. That must be really bad.
I just remember that one scene of him dressed as a turtle, which the rumor was that was filmed on 9/11, and he was dressed as the turtle when they found out that 9/11 happened, which is not true, though. I did some research. It's not true. What happened was it was a few weeks after 9/11, and they decided to do a moment of silence, but Dana Carvey was dressed as the turtle when they did the moment of silence, which is almost as bad. That's pretty bad.
How did he get caught out like that? That's unfortunate.
I think he was an EP on that movie, so he should have had to say so to be like, let me change.
Yeah, give me a minute here, guys. Let's show some respect.
T. Carrere has never stopped working. She makes 10 things a year.
Really?
Albums. Like, she's just super busy. So that's good. The movie opened in first place with $13.5 million, but there was a lot of competition. So that's a pretty good start. Yeah. Not a $180 million start, but first place for sure. Mrs. Doubtfire was in its third week at that point and took in $10 million. And then the new releases were Sister Act 2 and Geronimo, an American Legend. Fun fact, Matt Damon was in Geronimo, an American Legend. Matt Damon was in a movie in 1993.
Wow.
That's weird, right?
Yeah, that is weird. And I do not remember that name at all, that title.
No, neither do I. It looks terrible. I looked it up. Addams Family Values was still in the top 10 in its fourth week. So we were only a month removed from the release of Addams Family Values, a movie that I think we can both agree is better than this one.
Yeah.
The Pelican Brief was the big release the next week. So that came out at number 1 with $16 million. Mrs. Doubtfire stayed at number 2 with $9 million. So it only dropped $1 million. You're going to see a pattern develop here. Yeah. Wayne's World 2 dropped 54%, only made $6.2 million the second week.
Yeah, word of mouth starting to kick in.
Beethoven's Second, which I think is superior to the first, was another new release, took fourth place with $6 million. In the third week, since Wayne's World 2 was released, 1 and 2 stayed the same. Pelican Brief in first place, Mrs. Doubtfire in second. Mrs. Doubtfire actually got a 3% bump. It went up with no new theaters, just same amount of theaters. Sister Act 2 and Beethoven the Second left Wayne's World 2 in the dust at this point. Sister Act 2 had been out since before Wayne's World 2, and it was outlasting it already.
Wayne's going down. Yeah.
In the fourth week, Mrs. Doubtfire would jump 74% to $16.3 million. Wow. That's crazy. You never see that anymore. Like, I feel like if a movie opens low, it stays low.
Yeah, that feels like an old-fashioned thing when movies had more time to simmer in the theaters, and then some of them would really pick up that word-of-mouth steam and then just stay in the theater all summer. We've talked about movies that have had those kind of long theatrical runs, but for it to take that exponential arc, Mrs. Doubtfire fever must have caught the country. How does that happen?
The only movies I've seen gain more week over week lately are Everything Everywhere All at Once, which went from looking like it was going to be a big money loser to eventually turning a profit. And The Greatest Showman actually had a very similar trajectory to Mrs. Doubt, like where it was bombing hard and they just refused to take it out of theaters, and eventually it picked up some steam and ended up being a hit. But it's rare. I feel like now you just take the easy money on streaming and cut your losses.
Right. There's an off-ramp now, whereas these other guys had to try to make it work.
It's like The Northman's already on streaming as of today. And the movie came out just over a month ago, I think. Sad times for Robert Eggers. So that's Wayne's World 2. Did you have any closing thoughts you wanted to offer up on it?
I sure do. Let me tune up my guitar, pull on my baseball cap, and tuck my hair behind my ears. That was too big of a preamble for this, but my thought about Wayne's World is, as we touched on this, it's a movie that really doesn't want to burden you with anything. It's like, don't sweat it. We're just going to do a movie over here. We put these emotional story beats in there, but they're just there to hang the stuff on. It says it's about the pressure on Wayne to grow up. He tells us directly in the beginning, I'm feeling the pressure to grow up. And then at the end, Jim Morrison tells him that, yeah, this whole story was about you having to grow up. But in between that, I didn't see any of that on screen. He's well-liked. He has influence in his community. He attempts hard projects fearlessly. He succeeds at those hard projects. He has an impressive girlfriend. And while he has some issues with her, his issues are about insecurity, jealousy, maybe something that you could connect to his maturity level. but given the circumstances of having a girlfriend fulfilling her life dreams with the help of this other guy and leaving town and spending time with him, but that's not because you're a kid and you don't know how to be a man. That's like, okay, you're going through a difficult thing in a relationship. So like the story that they say is there isn't really there. And all that would be fine if it was totally just an excuse to run these characters around and do this high energy farce. But for me, because the funny bits, a lot of them felt a little half-hearted. Like only in that late part of the film does it come up with that farce energy where you forget the story. This is just about silly things happening. And it's only these little short bursts. Well, then each time that happened, I was like, oh, I wish there was more of those. And it was really like a wacky meta farce from end to end. And so it rolls along and there's no harm in it unless you consider your time so precious, in which case maybe don't turn on Wayne's World. I think that would be my advice.
Rude. Unnecessary to close out your monologue like that. No, I think you might have hit on something. Probably if I could take a time machine back to 93, I think most people were over the Wayne's World shtick by the time this movie came out. It did feel like something you had to grab at just the right time and milk it as hard as you could. And I think it probably was milked pretty dry by the time this came out. Of course, that doesn't impact our viewing now or even my viewing as a kid because I was a little kid. I didn't have my thumb on the cultural heartbeat or whatever.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that had something to do with why it wasn't as warmly received. And critics liked it about the same as they liked the first one. It got mostly positive reviews, but audiences just weren't there for it. And obviously we touched on something with Mrs. Doubtfire just fucking steamrolled comedy in the winter of 1993. What a juggernaut. There's now 2 episodes we can pretty much directly chalk up to Mrs. Doubtfire just crushing them.
Yeah.
Also, yeah, I think it'd be like trying to put out a second Borat movie, like a year after the first one. They waited 10 years to put out the sequel to Borat, probably because they thought everyone was sick of it by the time that came out and hearing people at bars and at Halloween parties just repeating catchphrases. So maybe if this had come out in 98 or 2003 or something, there'd be a little more of an appetite for it. But I can imagine your patience wearing thin by the time the second Wayne's World movie came out, just because the part we liked the least about this movie, like their little catchphrases and would be what you would hear nonstop.
Yeah.
Swinging everywhere. So I can understand why that would wear down the viewing audience. But I think taken out of that context, it's a very silly, very strange little movie that I find very enjoyable. So I would say if you're in for a little surreal comedy, it's quick. I don't think it's barely 90 minutes. It might be like 94 minutes.
I appreciate that.
Check it out. I recommend it. Was there anything else you wanted to add?
I was just going to say, based on your good observation there about the public's willingness to eat more Wayne and Garth catchphrases, maybe we should give Mike Myers a little more credit because he was trying to go in a different direction. He was trying to do something way weirder and take Wayne and Garth away. And basically the studio said, no, you need to just repeat the first movie with slightly different parameters. And it didn't really work. So maybe it's not his fault.
Well, we've also seen what happens when Mike Myers is like left to his druthers with the Love Guru. So it doesn't always work out so well.
Could have been a lot worse. We can't say.
Yeah, it could have been a disaster, but we got what we got. And I think it's pretty good. So next week's going to be a little different from this one. We're doing the Punisher, like I mentioned, the 2004 Tom Jane Punisher. So that'll be exciting. We haven't done many comic book movies. We've only done DC comic book movies, I'm fairly certain. So this will be our first Marvel property and a R-rated comic book movie.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And we like Tom Jane. We've had him in the zone a couple times. It's weird how much we get to reinvite some of our favorite actors into the zone.
I'll be honest, when I'm picking the movies, I'm probably like, I feel like watching The Punisher again because I haven't seen it in, 15 years or whatever. The movie's almost 20 years old, which is bananas. I saw it in theaters. I think I saw it twice. I was a big Punisher fan at the time, so I'm excited to dive back in and see if it holds up. Spoiler alert, I don't think it does.
Okay.
But
won't get my hopes up too high.
So that's it. Please remember to rate, review, subscribe to the pod. Give us a follow on Twitter at BlastZonePod. Shoot us an email, blastzonepod@gmail.com. Any suggestions, feedback, whatever. We'll see you next time in the Blast Zone.
See you next time in the Blast Zone.
We got to split, man. We got some cats we got to hang with.